The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.
What drives the relations between Italy and Georgia? What are the priorities of the Italian embassy for the next year? What could Georgia learn from Italy? These are some of the questions our reporter Georgy Aronia discussed with the ambassador of Italy to Georgia, His Excellency Enrico Valvo.
Hi there. Italy is one of the countries that Georgians love the most. This is evident through soft societal markers such as the prevalence of the Italian cuisine and Italian brands, as well as the hard financial data indicating tourism, trade and remittances. Recently, of course, the ties were strengthened even more by the talented Georgian football player Georgy Aronia, who has taken Naples by storm. Let's look at economics. During the first 9 months of 2022, the trade turnover between two countries amounted to $236 million, which represents an almost 25% increase year on year. During the same time period, foreign direct investment from Italy amounted to $1.4 million. What drives the relations between Italy and Georgia? What are the priorities of the Italian embassy for the next year? What could Georgia learn from Italy? These are some of the questions I will discuss today with the Ambassador of Italy to Georgia, His Excellency Enrico Valvo. Greetings, Mr. Ambassador. It's a pleasure to have you here at BMG.
It's a pleasure for me also to be here. Good afternoon.
Mr. Ambassador, you assumed this role 3 years ago. What could you say about these last 3 years? How could you summarize your work here?
Well, the first part of it was a little bit strange because we had to work with pandemics-related restrictions, and that, of course, hampered all of our activities, not only here in Georgia, but worldwide. We have tried to back up a little bit our capacity here in terms of economic and trade promotion, since we have opened a desk of an Italian trade agency within the embassy, and we have been working with them to let the opportunities in the Georgian economy known better in Italy, and to give day-by-day assistance to Italian companies or Georgian companies willing to make trade or business with Italy. This is basically what we did. We did also some a little bit more visible initiatives, which are connected to the fields where we are particularly strong and where there is a correspondent interest in Georgia. Namely, we made initiatives specifically devoted on design and architecture. We made specific initiatives on innovative economy and startups, and we made initiatives, of course, also on food and wine and agro-processing.
Mr. Ambassador, the last 3 years very crucial for Georgia in terms of European integration. Many things have happened. How would you rate the progress of our country in terms of on the road to the European integration? And what are your expectations in terms of implementation of the 12 recommendations issued by the European Union?
Well, the European Council last June really opened a window of opportunity for Georgia in order to fulfill what are the long-term expectations of a Georgian nation. Getting inside the European Union and getting integrally, politically and economically part of Europe. You know that this year President Zurabishvili was in a state visit to Italy, and when talking about this very issue, it was before the European Council, of course, when talking about this very issue, our President remarked publicly that it was only normal that Georgia wished to come back to Europe where it belongs, and we support that, of course. On the 12 recommendations that are part of a path which has to be followed, and it is important, of course, that they are properly implemented, but it is important also the way they are implemented. They should be implemented through an inclusive process, which will help, by the way, in down building the strong political polarization, which is not beneficial to the country.
Big part of European integration is not only political but economic and financial as well. Based on your communication with the Italian companies present here, Italian investors, and in general Italian people, what are the main challenges they see here in Georgia in terms of investment? You know, how do they rate investment climate here in Georgia?
Investment climate here is good, and despite this, the rate of Italian investment is not very high. I think there are specific reasons on this, and the specific reasons is that we have massively invested in the countries which are around you. Turkey is an example of this, and since we are going for big markets and export capabilities, that was up to now a problem for Georgia. But there is an interest also to work here. We have had in the past investments in agriculture, hazelnut growing, for example, and we are still there with it. And we are having a strong interest in energy renewables, hydropower. And there are a number of projects which are active now. And as I said, there is a strong interest, and according to results of the first investments, more might be coming.
What could be done to attract more and more Italian investors to Georgia?
Well, I think that, of course, the completion of the relevant connectivity infrastructure is important, and you are working on that with the help of international partners. And it's at a good stage, but it's not yet completed. I'm thinking in particular of transport connectivity once you arrive to the Black Sea. It's a long way to go from there onwards. And then I think also some work on the labor market would be useful in terms of upskilling. And that is also a part of a process which is ongoing and which I suppose will bring its fruits in the time to come.
Let's talk about DCFTA for a second. How important is it for the integration between the EU and Georgia? This would be my first question. And the second one, do you think that Georgia is reaping all the benefits that DCFTA has to offer?
The CFTA is no doubt extremely important for the integration of Georgia because on the economic side it puts all those, or a great deal of those requisites which are necessary to enter into the market without being crushed by market forces, which is absolutely essential and which is what has to happen in order for it to be a success. The benefits have not still been reaped completely, but I think that this is absolutely normal because it's an adaptation process when you move trade flows. It's an adaptation process when you build the necessary infrastructure. And at the end of the day, it's not a sprint race, it's a marathon, and it will bring fruits in the long run.
Let's go sector by sector now, because I'm very interested in all the export capabilities that Georgia has to offer. Nuts, as you mentioned, remain the second largest export commodity from Georgia to Italy. And I'll tell you some statistics. For 2022, the amount stands at roughly 14 million USD. In 2016, it stood at 48 million USD, phenomenal number. While last year at 31 million USD. So we see sharp decline year on year. What do you attribute this decline to?
Well, 2021 figures were not bad, as you remarked. As for this year is concerned, of course, I think that a role is also being played by the stink bug, which came back and with significant effects. And of course, the quality of the product has to be such that it can be used within the European Union market, and that is why the Italian company which has invested here in hazelnut growing close to Zucchini has tried to work in the past and still willing to do to work in cooperation with the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment of Georgia in order to upgrade the capabilities of local growers. Because the potential in terms of buying by the Italian agro-processing industry is very big, and there are margins to go back and even overtake the successes of the past.
Given that you mentioned the margins, what is the competitive advantage of Georgian nuts, and what should we as country business sector do to somehow outperform all the other countries that produce the same product?
Well, you had the tradition of growing hazelnuts in the western part of the country, but you have also a very good qualitative level of production in the east, which is new and which is performing pretty well. The very point is to bring the qualitative levels all over the country at a standard which can be bought on a massive scale. This will be the competitive advantage as far as the buyer, of course, the buyer, as in every field, looks for diversifying its sources of raw material, in this case, hazelnuts.
Another sector I'm very interested in is that you mentioned in the introduction, design and architecture. Could you elaborate, please, on how Italy supports the development of these two sectors in Georgia?
Well, we did it through specific initiatives, through the Italian Design Day. We organized seminars and expositions, and we had very good cooperation with this, also with the Ministry of Infrastructure and Development, regional development, because part of the expertise we brought here has to do with requalification of urban areas, which is of interest of Georgia in many respects. And it is also one of the fields which is connected to tourism, where Italian companies are actually working. I'm thinking, for instance, to the master plan for the requalification of Skaltubo, where a group of Italian companies is making the feasibility study. And in wider sense, also the tourism sector has to do with this, more with planning than with architecture itself. But in this field, we are, for instance, contributing to the artificial nose systems in Bakuriani, which are being now set up by an Italian company.
Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned tourism, and given the context, given Italy, given Georgia, this is the topic we cannot miss. Your predecessor, Ambassador Bartoli, in 2018, he said that tourism is Georgia's oil. What's your take on that?
It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true, and I would say that the interesting thing which may bring synergies between the two relevant industries in Italy and in Georgia is the fact that the ratio on GDP is pretty similar in Italy and Georgia. It's about 13%, and that has a big impact on the overall economy because it brings with itself a lot of other things. From services to persons, to building industry, to consumer goods, food, wine. So it's a very good engine for economic development. Of course, also in this case, diversification is important. The more nationalities you have, the better it is.
What could we, as a country that heavily relies on tourism, learn from Italy in this regard?
Well, I think that one important thing is that you take care of what you have in terms of natural goods and in terms of heritage, which, by the way, you are doing. It's important to continue to do it. And the second step is to merchandise it somehow. So it has to become iconic, and people must be willing to see that. People want to see the Colosseum in Rome. I think that people might be also willing to see some places in Mskheta, Svetitsko Veli, or might be willing to see the churches in Gergeti and the Kazbegi. It's a matter of promotion.
Is it pure marketing and branding, or there is something else to it?
There must be something underlying, of course. There is marketing and branding. And then, of course, there is the ability to let people enjoy that. But you can do that pretty well, thanks to Georgian hospitality.
Hospitality is one thing, but then the quality of the service offered is another. Based on your experience and your communication with Italian tourists here, how good is Georgian service?
I would assess the quality as good, also because the market is properly segmented. So you find a reasonable relation in terms of quality and price in all the segments of the market, and you can choose the one you want.
So Georgia and Italy are related, as I said in my introduction, in many ways. One of them being that a lot of Georgians have migrated to Italy in recent years. This obviously has its own positive, negative effects. The positive effects it has on remittances, which have been growing. Italy actually is the second country in terms of remittances for Georgia, with 316 million USD transferred in this year alone. What data do you have about Georgian citizens residing in Italy?
Yes, you quoted the right figures, the second place, and during the pandemic for some months we were also at the first place for a while. Figures are more than 18,500 Georgian citizens holding residence and work permits in Italy. That's the official figure.
What do you think attracts these people?
I think there are two underlying factors. First, it's pretty easy for them to integrate because of similarities in our approach to life. Think of the way we approach culture, wine, food, conviviality, but also family ties. And of course, the second factor is that there are sectors where there is a significant offer in Italy, which is connected to our aging population, and that's caretaking, of course. But what I want to stress is that those people working in Italy are for sure benefiting our economy, and through remittances also the Georgian economy.
And my last question would be, what are your next steps? In Georgia, what are your plans?
Well, we are planning to continue what we have been doing up to now in terms of day-to-day work with the companies in synergy with the agency, the trade agency. We have decided to make the desk in the embassy permanent and to upgrade it because we believe in the market. Then we are continuing to work in the sectors I quoted before with specific initiatives. Food and wine, design architecture, agro-processing, and cutting-edge technologies. This is what we are planning to do. Of course, we shall also continue in our program of cultural activities. We are trying to bring to Georgia what we can show of our culture, which is in itself something which is not so far from the economy for two reasons. First, there is an economy which is connected to cultural goods, the way they are used to gain money and to build an industry around that, first. And second, we perceive it as an integral component of our soft power, and soft power brings economic interaction with it, by definition.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador.
It was a pleasure.
Likewise. My guest today was the Ambassador of Italy to Georgia, His Excellency Enrico Valvo. The cultural and economic ties have existed between Georgia and Italy for centuries, so let's hope that nothing will stand between our two states in the years to come.
The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.